The land of Florin was set between where Sweden and Germany would eventually settle. This was before Europe. In theory, it was ruled by King Lotharon and his second wife, the Queen, but in fact, the king was barely hanging on, could only rarely tell day from night, and basically spent his time muttering. He was very old, every organ in his body had long since betrayed him, and most of his important decisions regarding Florin had a certain arbitrary quality that bothered many of the leading citizens. Prince Humperdinck actually ran things. If there had been a Europe, he would have been the most powerful man in it. Even as it was, nobody within 1,000 miles wanted to mess with him. The Count was Prince Humperdinck's only confidant. His last name was Rugen, but no one needed to use it. He was the only count in the country, the title having been bestowed by the prince as a birthday present some years before, the happening taking place naturally at one of the countess's parties. The countess was considerably younger than her husband. All of her clothes came from Paris. This was after Paris. And she had superb taste. This was after taste too, but only just. And since it was such a new thing, and since the countess was the only lady in all of Florin to possess it, is it any wonder that she was the leading hostess of the land? Eventually, her passion for fabric and face paint caused her to settle permanently in Paris, where she ran the only salon of international consequence. For now, she busied herself with simply sleeping on silk, eating on gold, and being the single most feared and admired woman in Florinese history. If she had figure faults, her clothes concealed them. If her face was less than divine, it was hard to tell once she got done applying substances. This was before glamour, but if it hadn't been for the ladies like the Countess, there would never have been a need for its invention. In sum, the Rugens were couple of the week in Florin, and had been for many years. "Quick, quick, come!" Buttercup's father stood in his farmhouse window staring out. "Why?" This from the mother. She gave away nothing when it came to obedience. The father made a quick finger point. "Look! Look, you know how." Buttercup's parents did not exactly have what you might call a happy marriage. All they ever dreamed of was leaving each other. Buttercup's father shrugged and went back to the window. "Ah," he said after a while, and a little later, "Ah." Buttercup's mother glanced up briefly from her cooking. "Such riches," Buttercup's father said. "Glorious." Buttercup's mother hesitated, then put her stew spoon down. This was after stew, but so is everything. When the first man first clambered from the slime and made his first home on land, what he had for supper that night was stew. "The heart swells at the magnificence," Buttercup's father muttered very loudly. "What exactly is it, dumpling?" Buttercup's mother wanted to know. Look, you know how," was all he replied. This was their 33rd spat of the day. This was long after spats, and he was behind 13 to 20, but he had made up a lot of distance since lunch, when it was 17 to 2. "Donkey," the mother said, and came over to the window. A moment later, she was going, "Ah," right along with him. They stood there, the two of them, tiny and awed. From setting the dinner table, Buttercup watched them. "They must be going to meet Prince Humperdinck someplace," Buttercup's mother said. The father nodded. "Hunting, that's what the prince does." "How lucky we are to have seen them pass by," Buttercup's mother said, and she took her husband's hand. The old man nodded. "Now I can die." She glanced at him. "Don't." Her tone was surprisingly tender, and probably she sensed how important he really was to her. Because when he did die, 2 years further on, she went right after, and most people who knew them well agreed that it was the sudden lack of opposition that undid her. Buttercup came close and stood behind them, staring over them, and soon she was gasping too, because the Count and the Countess and all their pages and soldiers and servants and courtiers and champions and carriages were passing by the cart track at the front of the farm. The three stood in silence as the procession moved forward. Buttercup's father was a tiny mutt of a man who had always dreamed of living like the Count. He had once been 2 miles from where the Count and the Prince had been hunting, and until this moment that had been the high point of his life. He was a terrible farmer, not much of a husband either. There wasn't really much in this world he excelled at, and he could never quite figure out how he had happened to sire his daughter, but he knew deep down that it must have been some kind of wonderful mistake, the nature of which he had no intention of investigating. Buttercup's mother was a gnarled shrimp of a woman, thorny and worrying, who had always dreamed of somehow just once being popular like the Countess. She was a terrible cook, an even more limited housekeeper. How Buttercup slid from her womb was of course beyond her, but she had been there when it happened. That was enough for her. Buttercup herself, standing half ahead over her parents, still holding the dinner dishes, still smelling of horse, only wished that the great procession wasn't quite so far away, so she could see if the Countess's clothes were really all that lovely. As if in answer to her request, the procession turned and began entering the farm. Here? Buttercup's father managed. My God, why? Buttercup's mother whirled on him. Did you forget to pay your taxes? This was after taxes, but everything is after taxes. Taxes were here even before stew. Even if I did, they wouldn't need all that to collect them. And he gestured toward the front of his farm, where now the Count and the Countess and all their pages and soldiers and servants and courtiers and champions and carriages were coming closer and closer. What could they want to ask me about, he said. Go see, Buttercup's mother told him. You go, please. No, you go. We'll both go. They both went, trembling. Cows, the Count said, when they reached the golden carriage. I would like to talk to you about your cows. He spoke from inside, his dark face darkened by shadow. My cows? Buttercup's father said. Yes, you see, I'm thinking of starting a little dairy farm of my own, and since your cows are known throughout the land as being Florence's finest, I thought I might pry your secrets from you. My cows, Buttercup's father managed to repeat, hoping he was not going mad, because the truth was, and he knew it well, he had terrible cows. For years, nothing but complaints from the people in the village. If anyone else had had milk to sell, he would have been out of business in a minute. Now granted, things had improved since the farm boy had come to slave for him. No question, the farm boy had certain skills, and the complaints were quite non-existent now. But that didn't make his the finest cows in Florin. Still, you didn't argue with the Count. Buttercup's father turned to his wife. What would you say my secret is, my dear? He asked. Oh, there are so many, she said. She was no dummy, not when it came to the quality of their livestock. You two are childless, are you? The Count asked then. No, sir. Then let me see her, the Count went on. Perhaps she will be quicker with her answers than her parents. Buttercup, the father called, turning. Come out, please. How did you know we had a daughter? Buttercup's mother wondered. A guess. I assumed it had to be one or the other. Some days I'm luckier than... He simply stopped talking then, because Buttercup had moved into view, hurrying from the house from her parents. The Count left the carriage. Gracefully, he moved to the ground and stood very still. He was a big man, with black hair and black eyes, and great shoulders and a black cape and gloves. Curtsy, dear, Buttercup's mother whispered. Buttercup did her best, and the Count could not stop looking at her. Understand now, she was barely rated in the top 20. Her hair was uncombed, unclean. Her age was just 17, so there was still in occasional places the remains of baby fat. Nothing had been done to the child, nothing was really there but potential. But the Count could still not rip his eyes away. The Count would like to know the secrets behind our cow's greatness. Is that not correct, sir? Buttercup's father said. The Count only nodded, staring. Even Buttercup's mother noticed a certain tension in the air. Ask the farm boy, he tends them, Buttercup said. And is that the farm boy? Came a new voice from inside the carriage. Then the Countess's face was framed in the carriage doorway. Her lips were painted a perfect red, her green eyes lined in black. All the colors of the world were muted in her gown. Buttercup wanted to shield her eyes from the brilliance. Buttercup's father glanced back toward the lone figure peering around the corner of the house. It is? Bring him to me. He's not dressed properly for such an occasion, Buttercup's mother said. I have seen bare chests before, the Countess replied. Then she called out, You, and pointed at the farm boy. Come here. Her fingers snapped on here. The farm boy did as he was told. And when he was close, the Countess left the carriage. When he was a few paces behind Buttercup, he stopped, his head properly bowed. He was ashamed of his attire, worn boots and torn blue jeans. Blue jeans were invented considerably before most people suppose. And his hands were tied together in almost a gesture of supplication. Have you a name, farm boy? Westley, Countess. Well, Westley, perhaps you can help us with our problem. She crossed to him. The fabric of her gown grazed his skin. We are all of us here passionately interested in the subject of cows. We are practically reaching the point of frenzy, such is our curiosity. Why do you suppose, Westley, that the cows of this particular farm are the finest in all of Florin? What do you do to them? I just feed them, Countess. Well, then, there it is. The mystery is solved. The secret. We can all rest. Clearly the magic is in Westley's feeding. Show me how you do it, would you, Westley? Feed the cows for you, Countess? Bright lad. When? Now will be soon enough, and she held out her arm to him. Lead me, Westley. Wesley had no choice but to take her arm, gently. It's behind the house, madam. It's terribly muddy back there. Your gown will be ruined. I wear them only once, Westley, and I burn to see you in action. So off they went to the cowshed. Throughout all this, the Count kept watching Buttercup. I'll help you, Buttercup called after Westley. Perhaps I'd best just see how he does it, the Count decided. Strange things are happening, Buttercup's parents said. And off they went too, bringing up the rear of the cow-feeding trip, watching the Count, who was watching their daughter, who was watching the Countess, who was watching Westley.